This week's module is Policy, Initiatives, and Economics of Caregiving. So as we're studying issues in aging caregiving, we wonder, why is policy so important to caregivers? Well, according to the National Alliance for Caregiving, in 2009, more than 65 million people, that's 29% of the United States population, provide care for a chronically ill, disabled, or aged family member or friend during any given year, and they spend about an average of 20 hours per week providing care for that loved one. So policies that support programs and services for caregivers will be essential for care of the aging population, especially in the next decade. In Chapter 10 of our text by Qualls and Zarit, they talk about the different types of initiatives that are being implemented. There are 4 that are identified. First is direct services. Those include in-home support, which would be respite care, companion care services, and other home-based services like homemaking, maybe yard work. Then also consumer-directed approaches. Those would be reductions in allowances for individuals and states that provide care on a regular basis. Then employment-based mechanisms. These are organizational policies by employers to assist with those employees who are caregivers. Lastly, they talk about financial incentives and compensation, and we'll review different tax incentives and direct payments to caregivers and care recipients. When we talk about caregivers and their families, the most important thing to them is receiving direct service. And 2 of the most widely used supportive services would include respite and companion care. These 2 services could be either used in-home or in a facility like an adult day center. Those direct services could only be provided through some policy that was passed through the federal government. And one of the most important pieces of legislature was the Older Americans Act of 1965 that looked at making sure that the agencies were from federal, state, and local agencies represented, and that they dedicated themselves to looking at the needs of older adults. Out of that act came the National Family Caregiver Support Program, and that was actually administered through the Administration on Aging. And what it does is it provides services and support for caregivers. It provides information, training, counseling services, and respite care to those caregivers, and provides the funds and the necessary means to get those services to them. 2 other important programs to note that came out of the Older Americans Act would be the Lifespan Respite Care Act. And that was enacted through different states that they wanted to make sure that they had a common goal of improving the quality and accessibility of respite care for families, regardless of age or disability. And that was passed and signed into law in 2006. And then there was also the creation of the Aging and Disabilities Resource Centers. And that was also through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. What they did is they brought a collaborative together within the state level to put kind of a streamlined, coordinated system of information and access for people that were seeking long-term care and support for their loved ones. In recent years, policymakers have realized that an important factor in long-term care is consumer choice. So programs and services have been set up that really provide that client or that consumer the ability to choose and also be flexible in the use of the funds that they are given. One such program is called Cash and Counseling Initiative, and that was enacted in 1998. And it is a consumer-directed approach to community-based long-term care that provides a flexible monthly allowance to recipients that receive Medicaid And they can use this for personal care services or home and community-based services. Currently, it's available in 12 states, and it is still being looked at expanding into the existing states. The program itself has been evaluated and been shown to be very successful, and people that actually were in the program showed more positive affect, life satisfaction, and fewer burdens, especially with the caregivers in their performance at their job and in their home life. So it has been a very promising program. Another program that was rolled out is the Deficit and Reduction Act of 2005, and that is where care recipients have the choice to be able to use funds to pay family caregivers for their time that they spend providing care. This is a great program because it does provide that option to people. Instead of going into a long-term care facility, they can use these funds to already pay their family member that is taking care of them to stay at home. There might not be that financial burden if they have to stay home and they are unable to work. So it really is a win-win situation for both the care recipient and the caregiver. Lastly, one of the programs is Choices for Independence, and that was launched by the Administration on Aging, and it helps individuals to make more informed decisions on care and also reduce their risk by behavioral changes. As we know, many caregivers are adult children, and they are still in the workforce, and therefore they are struggling to not only go to work and provide for their family financially, but also, have that time to provide care for that loved one that might be at home. So it's very exciting to see that there are employment-based policies that are coming out to address the needs of family caregivers. This is very important, especially as the nation ages. One of the most important pieces of legislation regarding employment is the Family and Medical Leave Act, also known as FMLA. And that was signed into place in 1993. Many people believe that is used sometimes for maternity leave or if there's a major health event, but it also can be used for employees to take time up to 12 weeks to leave to care for an aging parent or family member. Unfortunately, although it does protect someone's job while they're leaving to take care of their family member, it is unpaid leave. So it's important for organizations and companies to look at how can they bridge that gap and provide some type of monetary benefit to employees while at the same time allowing them to take time off for respite care. So there's a new wave of employment-based benefits, one that I found while looking on the internet called Life Care, and it's a senior management program that is being adopted by big organizations, and it is something that will provide as one of the benefits in their benefit package, time and compensation to employees to leave to take care of maybe a disabled or an aging parent. And this is very important. According to Forbes, caregiving employees often come in late or leave early to care for aging loved ones and on average miss 7 days of work per year, which overall is a cost to U.S. companies of $33 billion. So you can see how important putting these employment-based policies into place will be going forward. I would say one of the main challenges faced by caregivers is that financial burden. And so federal policymakers have really made efforts to respond to these challenges by putting into place policies that ease that economic burden of caregiving. Two of these programs would include direct payments and also tax incentives, such as the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit Act, and that actually allows caregivers to claim a non-refundable tax credit to offset the cost of caring for the child or a dependent with a physical or mental. There's another piece to that, which is the Dependent Care Assistance Program, and that also allows caregivers to exclude up to $5,000 of their earnings for qualified dependent care expenses. So all although these are really good incentives, there still needs to be more policies put into place to ease that financial burden for family caregivers. So what type of work and advocacy is being done on a national level? Well, national support for caregiving entails, it goes through a process where every year at the White House Conference on Aging, they talk about different strategies and programs and services that need to be established to meet the needs of our aging population. This White House Conference on Aging was established in 1961 and started with a citizen forum to address the issues in aging. Now it is more strategy focused, and it looks on adopting solution-based programs for our aging problems. Out of this came the development of the National Family Caregiver Support Program that we spoke about earlier. And some of the advances have come from this conference in partnering, like the Administration on Aging, with other government agencies for like the Centers for Disease Control and other health related agencies that can really look at the overall aspect of aging and what type of needs will need to be actually addressed through policy in the years to come. Around the country, there's also national coalitions that have been developed to look at family caregiving issues and how that's important within policy. And some of the initiatives that they have come up with and presented would be the Grandparent Kinship Caregiver Support Act, the Americans Giving Care to Elders Act, the Alzheimer's Family Assistance Act and Alzheimer's Breakthrough Act, Community Living Assistance Services and Support Act, and also expanding the Family Medical Leave Act. As our population ages, we also see there is a growing number of veterans and military service personnel and their spouses that are in need of services like respite care and companion care. The Veterans Administration has been a national leader on aging and caregiver issues and have provided for within their benefits services for older adult veterans and spouses. Some of those are funding for adult day and respite care services, as well as in-home health and companion care services, and educational information and support groups. So as we reflect on policy initiatives towards caregiving, we really want to look at what are the types of caregiver support that are most important. As we've identified, respite care services are in great demand. Also, information and assistance. Knowledge is power, and many people do not know where to find those services. That is one of the barriers to actually utilization of services, is actually finding out the information where to go. Counseling and support groups are also very helpful for caregivers. Personal care, homemaker and chore services, legal and financial services, and also other supplemental services that will support caregivers and their families. So one would think that if there were policies in place and programs created, that people would use them. However, service utilization has many different barriers. And just because the programs exist does not mean that the people are actually using them. So what are some of the reasons why caregivers would not use these services? Well, number one would be the lack of knowledge about the service. They may have no idea this exists. So on the federal, state, and local level, this is really marketing and getting that information out to the consumers that need that. Eligibility criteria, many of the programs have different demands for eligible requirements. That could be a deterrent for people using the service. Also, caregiver self-identification. That person caring for their mom that's been living with them for the past year and a half might not realize that they are actually in the role of a caregiver, and number two, that they would benefit from those supportive services. So that one hurdle for them to at least self-identify that, hey, I am a caregiver and it would really help me out if I had some respite services for myself and for mom. That is one of the battles that they face. And then also culture. We have several different cultures, such as the Latino culture or the African American culture, that really have been that family supportive network, and they really don't believe that they need those extra services, or they may not be trusting of the agencies that are providing those services. So the many cultural barriers exist, and so those programs that are out there that are being funded might not actually be getting to the folks that need them. So just to expand on some of the federal policy and programs that are in existence, there was the Olmstead decision, which actually made it that states need to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they cannot discriminate on providing community-based services outside of an institutional setting. There is also the Medicaid waiver program, and that provides for the use of Medicaid funds to cover long-term care services. It covers for the cost of some assisted living services, for respite care services, and other health-related services. And then the National Family Caregiver Support Program, which is that entitlement program aimed at providing services to caregivers, including receiving respite, counseling, education, and support groups. So what are the current trends and best practices in caregiving from state level? Three things that we're showing that have been implemented are a caregiver assessment, and this is a state-directed guideline to help provide support, guidance, and care to caregivers. And also using a mobile technology for outreach, a centralized database to help people coordinate getting those services, and also providing education and tools needed to the caregivers. The consumer direction trend is those things that we spoke about, like the cash and counseling model, which are personal choice vouchers for needed services, and really that flexibility and the consumer choice on how to use those. Then collaboration and coordination among service providers. This is key. Aging programs and health service providers need to collaborate in order to provide appropriate services to care recipients and their caregivers. In conclusion, throughout this module, we talked a lot about policies, initiatives, and trends for services and programs for caregivers and care recipients. As our population continues to age, the number of informal caregivers will continue to increase as well. And caregivers today are in that sandwich generation. They're caring for aging relatives as well as their own children. So the resources and support, both financial and respite, that they need will continue to increase as well. Programs and services will need to be implemented to provide those respite, support, and education services to informal caregivers. And as I mentioned, marketing and getting the word out to the consumers that these programs exist will be key to utilization of the services. And federal and state policy will be needed to support these needs for the caregiver and care recipient, and it'll be essential in maintaining the health and well-being of both parties.